I'd like to call to order the Charter Township of Oxford Planning Commission meeting scheduled for Thursday, February 27th, 2020. Please rise and pay respects to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we note the roll call with absences from Mr. Spiz, Mr. Hunwick?
Yes, so noted. There is a quorum.
Thank you. Item 4, approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the Charter Township of Oxford Planning Commission regular meeting agenda for Thursday, February 27th, 2020.
I'll second.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes. Item 5, approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the Planning Commission regular meeting minutes from January 23rd, 2020.
I'll second.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes. Item 6, public comments for items that are not scheduled on this agenda or a public hearing. Is there anyone out in the public wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda?
Just clarification, because on the agenda it says for items that are on the agenda or not on the agenda. Is it only items that are not on the agenda? this time?
Yeah,
Okay,
items not scheduled for public hearing or on this agenda.
because I would like to speak in regards to unfinished business 8A.
Yes,
So
you'll
I speak-
have that opportunity during that time,
Oh, okay.
right, because that's on the agenda. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's a peculiar way to put the word not, huh?
Yeah, that's why I needed clarification.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. All right, move to item 7. Anyone else out in the public? No? Okay, let's move to 7. Commissioners' comments.
Well, I don't have any, except that there's a new young man in the audience tonight that's going to be working with the township soon through Carlisle Wortman, and Zach is standing over there. If you'd like to stand up and just introduce yourself. He's going to be one of our planners working with him.
Howdy, it's been a while since I think I've really qualified as a young man, but I'll take it.
Well, to me, you are.
Okay, I'll take that. As mentioned, my name is Zach Michels. I'm working with Carlisle Wortman now. I'd previously worked for Dexter Township as the Director of Planning and Zoning, and with Steuben County as the Director of Planning, or Plan Directors, they call it in Indiana. I'm also currently on the Dexter City Council. And in my spare time, I've been driving Zamboni, which is probably more interesting than any of that other bit. I'm going to be following Mr. Wortman here for a while, for a couple months, and I look forward to working with you and very excited to see folks that are engaged and interested in the community.
Thank
you.
Welcome, Zach.
You know, calls me Mr. Wortman. He knows his age.
Is that it, Mr. Burr?
Yes, sir.
Ms.
Thank
Goff?
you.
Nothing.
Mr. Nolan?
I hope everybody made it through the snow and the icy roads. M24, we've got more, what are those things called? They're orange and about this big around and about 4 feet tall.
State flower.
State flower.
Early spring.
It's around the corner, folks. It's coming here.
Mr. Curtis?
Nothing at this time.
Okay. Let's move to item 8, public hearings. There is none scheduled for this evening. Move into item 8A, preliminary site plan, reaffirming and providing comments back to the Township Board regarding the William Beaumont Hospital. Is the applicant here? What we'll do is have you give us a brief update. Then we'll go through some comments that have been updated by our staff, consultants. Take some public comment if there is any, and then we'll have a discussion with the commissioners.
Very good. We do have a little PowerPoint presentation to run through. I think I have it all connected up here. There we go. Okay, so thank you again. Just to introduce myself, it's nice to see everybody again. My name is Brian Wickersham. I'm Director of Ambulatory Expansion at Beaumont, and certainly happy to be part of this project as we think it's really exciting. Just a little bit of information about Beaumont. I think a lot of folks know this, but I always like to start off with just providing a high-level introductory to those that may not be familiar. But Beaumont Health is the largest health system in Michigan. Based on NRC health survey data, we are the most preferred health system in Michigan as well. I think something that kind of gets lost in the weeds because of our size is the fact that we are a not-for-profit health system. So we don't have any shareholders or ownership groups that take profit out of our bottom line. Every dollar that we earn gets turned right back around into patient care. It's very important from our perspective of reminding ourselves why we came together as Beaumont Health, and that's just to enable greater access to provide our patients with the compassionate, extraordinary care every day that we hope to achieve. So with that, I also found a fun little fact about Oxford that I thought I'd start this off with. And it's interesting to me when I pulled the data that over the last year, we've seen 11,000 unique citizens that provide Oxford Township as a home address. So I'm sure you have some general sense of your population, but when we look at that, it's roughly about 42% of your population is a Beaumont patient this year. So one of the things when we look at this project of what we're hoping to achieve, as mentioned in previous discussions, was to bring that health care to this area, make it more convenient for the folks that live in this region to have access to high quality care. So why we're here today, really four main reasons, and I'm not going to go through this slide in detail because it's pulled from some of the more formal documents, but it's four things. It's one, to reaffirm the use, that we are able to operate a hospital and ambulatory use on this site. Two, it is to request waiver on the timing required with the typical PUD process. Three, looking to increase the overall building height in terms of the current restrictions that are in place. And four, to talk a little bit about our signage requests that are over and above the standard city ordinance. So starting with the first piece that I really want to spend a little bit of time on is the timing. I think part of the concern when we first came was we asked for 10 years. And, folks, I don't think want to see property tied up for 10 years with no development taking place. So what you typically allow in the PUD ordinance is a 12-month period from preliminary to final site plan. We want to expand that primarily because there's a lot of unknowns that we're working with right now, primarily at the state level with our certificate of need application. So what I did, and this is going to be a little bit hard to read the detail, I'm hoping you received these packets ahead of time and might have been able to review, but we put together a sample timeline and what we're calling conservative timeline. Not something that we hope plays out in this manner, but one that we think is certainly possible. And what you'll see in the top half is essentially what we've been calling phase one, which is our ambulatory campus. And you see, based on the timing, that we really anticipate starting that, ideally if we achieve the approvals that we're hoping for early this year, with coming back for final PUD site plan approval at some point next year. It is a process that would get started right away, again, to bring health care to this community. It's already been shown that it's a need, and it's something that we want to fulfill. What you see on the bottom side is phase two, or what we've been referring to is the hospital use. And that first line there is that big, long hospital CON process, which is really the unknown. And we provided, again, a conservative estimate that in a worst-case scenario, this could be tied up in the legal system for anywhere upwards of 8 years. Could it be a year? Could it be 6 months? Could it be 5 years? We just don't know, and that's why we really want to be conservative with where we're gauging this out, so that we do still have the confidence that if we do receive the approvals, we'll be able to move forward with our project. Anything on the timing, or would you prefer that I just go through the whole thing real quick before taking any questions? Commissioner Young?
Let's go through your whole thing first, because I think we'll address probably each item
Sure.
one by one as we go through our comments.
Okay. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about building height. and why we're asking for the deviation. A little bit of just quick information here on the certificate of need process. The state identified what was called a limited access area, and it is very specific defined geographic region. And what we did, what I wanted to do here is show you in the pink in that top graph of what they identified as the limited access area. I brought it to the M24 intersection here, or M24, which I think most of us would believe would be the most reasonable place to put a facility of this size, would be located off of M24, and then overlaid that limited access area map. And what you see there is there's a very small stretch of M24 that's actually captured within the limited access area. And in that very small stretch, there's actually one parcel that's even large enough to consider this, and that's the one that we currently have under an option. When we look at that, it's about 24 and a half acres, and when you're dealing with a property of that size and having to provide a 117-bed hospital like the state suggests, you can't necessarily build that horizontally. It does need to go up. So what we wanted to do is look at this in a different light, and instead of looking at it in terms of stories, which is what we initially talked about the last time we were here, we wanted to get very specific and talk through in terms of feet. So there's no, games that can be played or misunderstandings that can take place when trying to define a story. And what we're asking for this time around is a maximum of 110 feet. That's measured from the first floor to the highest point of the building. So this would not include basements, chimneys, shafts, equipment, antennas. It's just the true highest point of the facility. So one of the things that we heard last time we were here was folks just trying to grasp what that could look like, because there's nothing of that size anywhere around this region and how it necessarily fits in the landscape. So we did work with one of the consultants that we partner with to try to do some visibility studies to give you a sense of what it could look like or what it could feel like. And I'll start with that big picture on the left. And what you're seeing along M24 there is essentially a visibility graph. Where you see the red, you cannot see the building at all if you were driving in a vehicle up M24. As you approach into the yellow, you start to see pieces of it, but you don't truly see it until you hit that green space there. And knowing that there's a high level of sensitivity around the residential neighborhoods that we would back into, we wanted to actually get into those neighborhoods via Google Earth and the viewpoints that they're able to provide, to really provide a perspective of what are they going to be able to see from the backyards, from those streets, to attempt to put it into perspective. Now, of course, is this actually real? Is this what you'll experience? No, you could be looking at it from one angle or another, and it's certainly going to change. But this is one point of view that we wanted to try to approach to show you what it would look like or what it would feel like. On this next slide is the same exercise, but heading southbound on M24. You actually don't really see much of our building until you would hit Market Street. And that's primarily because of the parcel that sits on the southeast corner of Market, and M24 has a lot of vegetation that is fairly high there. So you won't really be able to see our building until you're at that intersection of M24 and Market Street. But again, I think what we're trying to display is this isn't, as it fits in with the landscape, this isn't a milestone that you're going to see from miles and miles away. The reality of it is how it's set back off the road and just where it sits and positions itself. You have to start to get pretty close to it before it's going to appear in your perspective. Moving on, I'm going to talk about signage now at this point. So we wanted to approach this in a way that certainly reflected, I think, some of the comments that we heard initially, where this is a massive amount of signage that you guys are requesting. It was, and frankly, to give you some perspective of how we came up with the initial signage request that came last year, we copied some of our signage requirements in a PUD that was approved through Lennox Township in our project that's going through there right now. So it was really a duplicative effort, knowing that we're looking at similar types of buildings, and that's where we started at. That would make us feel comfortable. we sensed that signage was a very large concern. So we sharpened our pencils and did what we felt was the best that we could do for this particular property. So your existing ordinance in terms of freestanding signs being 100 square feet, we're looking for 400 square feet. The wall signs that have a current ordinance of 200 square feet, we're looking for 1,200. So approximately 4x of current ordinance on freestanding and 6 times on wall signs, but certainly tremendously less than what we were originally asking for. We appreciate the concern, and we tried to put our best effort in terms of what we could move forward with and feel really comfortable about. So what does that look like in terms of our conceptual site plan? There's 5 different types of signs that we're going to identify. I want to make note that the images that you're looking at on the screen are just examples of signs that we have moving forward in other campuses. They're not necessarily the exact signs we'd have for this project, but that is the look and feel of recent signs that we've approved to go on some of our projects. So we'll talk, I really want to separate wayfinding from branding, because based on some of the conversation that we heard, I think everybody understands that when a patient or a family member is under duress and they're trying to navigate their way to the proper entrance of a campus of this size, wayfinding is ultimately important. So while on the particular wall signs and your ordinance does kind of capture these wayfindings for the purpose of our presentation, we really split them out. And we said wayfinding is a must. It's not necessarily branding for us. It's not to call out the Beaumont name. It's really to direct a patient where they need to go to get to the appropriate point of care. So the 2 that we really focused on, and I'll jump up one more, where we look at freestanding signs and wall signs, are everything that you see in blue here related to branding and branding wall signs. And we try to take this and approach it, placing it on our conceptual site plan to give you a feel of what that would look like. So when we call out 2 monument signs, it's a sign at our 2 entrances off of M24, those 2 blue dots. When we talk about the wall signs, it's situated in such a way so that we feel that you'd see it coming from both directions, one for that ambulatory campus and one for the hospital building there. And then all the little red dots, circles being ground-mounted wayfinding signs, the triangles being building-mounted wayfinding signs, such as one you would see on a canopy overhanging a particular entrance, with the one exception of the wayfinding wall sign, which would be the emergency entrance, so folks know where that particular entrance would be. So with that, just to recap, we're really excited about the opportunity to bring healthcare to Oxford. We think this is a fantastic opportunity to provide care that has been determined is a very much so a need. We're in the process where we have an open option on the land. A project of this size, just from the planning perspective, is a significant lift in terms of resources. And for us, we're really trying to get comfortable that we're going to be able to develop the Class A facility that we desire to prior to really investing a heavy amount of resources into that. Because again, being a nonprofit organization, every dollar that we're spending is certainly well-intentioned and meant to provide health care to our patients. With that concludes my presentation, and Commissioner Young, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. I don't know, could go with the planner first, engineering. Yeah, let's do that first. We'll go with our comments first from the planner and engineering. Jim, you want to start?
I will. Mine are going to be pretty simple because this is a reaffirmation of some of these items. Really, the length of the PUD, the height, and the sign issues all really fall under Mr. Wortman. Mr. Wortman. See, I even say it. Under Mr. Wortman's purview. So we have no objections to this reaffirmation whatsoever. We did have a few comments, simply that the previous preliminary site plan review letter that we did dated December 3rd of 2019, that the items in there still be addressed. That if the time period is extended, that the applicant understands that whatever the design standards, engineering design standards of the time are, that they will adhere to that. They had a couple issues in their project narrative, or not issues, but just items in their project narrative. One of them regarding the improvement to traffic patterns, and I just, even though they have entrances and lights and things like that identified, that there is no accepted plan by MDOT at this time, so they're still working through that process. I'm sure that it'll come up with something beneficial to everybody in that area. And then they also, with regarding to pedestrian connectivity, they did say in the project narrative that they would install all of the safety path as part of phase one, so I think that's very positive. But it did not say with regards to the water and the sewer improvements that are supposed to be installed along the frontage, when they were going to be installed, so I just want to make clear that that should also be installed as part of phase one as well. But other than that, like I say, because it's a reaffirmation of these things that they're looking for, we really have no additional comments, and we have no objections to recommending this preliminary PUD again.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, our latest review is dated February 14th, 2020, and you recall that the Planning Commission previously recommended approval on December 12th, 2019. So what this is a reaffirmation and clarification both of the hospital use, the time period, the height, and the sign package. And on page 3 of our review, we do touch on the first item, which is the use of hospitals in the C2. Personally, or from our office's perspective, we have no problem with this in terms of it. And I think back in December, we even mentioned that you could view this as a down zoning. A C2 would allow basically a shopping center. And when you look at the traffic, when you look at the footprint of the building, et cetera, that this hospital use or the ambulatory services could actually be less intensive than many of the uses that would be allowed in the C2. So for us, that is not the issue. The timing, the phasing, the request for 10 years, we have heard some concerns regarding the length of time for this PUD. That item could also possibly be addressed in the final PUD agreement between the township and the applicant. I've discussed this with the township attorney, but if the board is comfortable with the 10 years or something less, that could certainly be structured within the PUD agreement. So from that aspect, I feel that that is more of an administrative decision by the township and or by the township board. Regarding the height, the proposed height of 110 feet, it is true that I think the site helps mitigate the size of the building, the height of the building. And also with the size, nearly 25 acres, we feel that there is adequate setbacks. So from that aspect, we feel that the height should not be as obtrusive. There is also a slope of land to the east going up towards the high school, that area, and the apartments, and that also helps mitigate the overall size of the height. So I think that the height is in some ways mitigated by the exact site. However, one of our concerns is that the applicant has not provided a detailed rendering of the proposed 110-foot high building. They have submitted a representative rendering showing a 2- or 3-story building. This may be the drawing that was submitted for Lenox Township. One of our concerns is that the detailed architecture is not particularly provided. We do not know specifics regarding the quality of the building materials. We do not know specifics regarding the details of the roof structure, the canopies, etc. We do find that oftentimes the height of a building can be managed by quality architecture. One thing that we pointed out in our review is that oftentimes we look at recesses in the building, projections in the building. What you want to do is create shadow lines that provide interest and appeal to that building. We haven't seen that in this particular drawing. Recesses, projections, the canopies. I had mentioned at the December meeting, step backs are another way that you can help mitigate. What we're trying to do is minimize the appearance of a monolith that you're creating. And you do that by architectural detail. But to some extent, we haven't seen all that information. We feel that the architect could provide further assurances, either in additional drawings or renderings. Another way that could also be explored is design standards that are incorporated within the PUD agreement. If we can't be provided with actual drawings or details of the structure, I think design standards that describe these recesses, the projections, the canopies, the step backs, the quality materials could be provided in the PUD agreement. So that could possibly be one way of, let's say, navigating through this particular issue. But I do feel that additional information should at least be provided on in order to accept a height of 110 feet. The last section in our review details the signage issue. I agree with the applicant. I think the wayfinding signs are needed. I think you absolutely do need to have an ability to navigate the site in a proper manner. I have no problems with the wayfinding signs. And also, I might point out in the zoning ordinance, directional signs are exempt. So from that aspect, I think the wayfinding signs as presented are acceptable. I do have problems with the branding signs, specifically the two wall signs that are proposed to exceed 600 square feet. I might add that the applicant indicated that they're proposing to exclude margins. And I did receive a clarification on that. What that means is they're only measuring the size of a symbol or font or lettering and drawing a square rectangle around the actual lettering or symbol. That would be the 600 square feet.
Right.
Everything else beyond that would be considered marginal and would go above and beyond the 600 feet requested. That is not how the township measures signs.
Right.
In your ordinance, it's very specifically measured, and margin areas would be included. We also, in our review, we did provide additional information regarding signage standards from surrounding townships. We have provided information from Orion Township, Brandon Township, Independence, and also compared that with Oxford Townships. Oxford Township's ordinance are not overly restrictive, especially when you look at your neighboring townships. So from that aspect, we feel that the 600 square feet is excessive, and that while the applicant is typically, you would be allowed one wall sign, the applicant is requesting two. I feel two would be acceptable because you would want to be able to see it from both the north and the south. But on the other hand, the size of the signs do exceed normal zoning standards and should be looked at further. In terms of the monument signs, they certainly are needed. I think they're necessary to indicate to motorists the main entrances, but 14 feet high is a bit too high. I've looked at Beaumont's facility in Royal Oak off of 13 Mile Road. That is considerably smaller when you look at what could be done, both in terms of wall signage and also the monument signs. I also encourage the applicant to look at potential for incorporating the monument signs within attractive landscape feature. The boulder wall that's in front of Myers, the across the street, the Waterstone image, the detailing that they provided at the entrance of Waterstone at Market Street, incorporating some of those details, perhaps within the monument signage, could be considered. So I would suggest that the Planning Commission look at that as some possibilities for refinement, and/or reconsideration. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess in summary, we have no problems with the proposed use of C2. I think the time period of 10 years could be examined. If the Township Board has problems with that, alternative time periods could be specified within the PUD agreement. I do have concerns regarding the height and specifically how the height can be mitigated, especially regarding the architectural detailing. And then I also had some concerns regarding the signage, in particular the size of the wall signs and the height of the monument signs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, good. We also have the fire chief. You probably got another letter from him. He says there's no changes since the last one on December 2nd, so you've got that list. I'm sure you're in tune with it. Outside of that, that's the last piece of correspondence I have, so we'll take any public comment about these 4 items, whether it's reaffirming the use, the timing, the height, or the signage. If there's anyone out in the public wishing to speak, come up to the lectern. You've got 3 minutes to give us your talk. Give us your address as well.
Good evening, Mary Ann Keynes. I'm president of the Stony Lake Village Condo Association within the Waterstone community. And I am one of those 11,000 satisfied Beaumont customers that was mentioned by Mr. Wickersham. And I am looking forward to Beaumont coming to Oxford Township. However, as a resident of Oxford Township, a very close resident to this facility, I do have some concerns, and there are 5 of them, so I'll be very quick in going through them because a lot of them were already discussed by Mr. Vortman, who seems to have been in my head this evening, which is kind of a scary place to think that there's 2 of us, detailed logisticians in the room. But first is the M24 traffic. Just again, I voiced these concerns before. In a previous meeting, it was discussed perhaps channeling, I think that was the correct word, channeling some of the traffic off of M24 into the facilities parking lot area so that traffic wanting to enter into that facility wouldn't hold up the mainstream traffic on M24. So I just wanted to bring that about again because M24 and with MDOT, we're hoping that we can get a left turn capability traffic light that at Market Street and M24. We're also hopeful that we can get a real left turn capability lane there by the Culvers area, you know, where Flagstar Bank is. That's a very dangerous area on M24 already, and with this facility going there, it even makes it more so. So I just wanted to bring the traffic issue up this evening because it wasn't really mentioned. Item number 2 was the hospital, the 7 stories requested. Again, yes, we were looking at 3 or 4. 7 seems to be excessive. We as residents are concerned. For instance, going out my door wall and onto my patio, I will be looking at this facility directly. So 7 stories up high would probably block the sun coming up that I see, the beautiful view of the sun coming up right now. It also ties into the facade, you know, what Mr. Vortman said about architecture. I've been thinking about this, and, you know, we take great pride in the fact that downtown Oxford got historical designation, and we'd really like, you know, we don't want this to be the monolith. We really would like this to complement the area. So I guess I was thinking if you go down to downtown Oxford, you see darker colored brick, you see limestone capstones over windows, you see black wrought iron, and we are the gravel capital of the world. I still think we hold that title, and even with the public library fireplaces, they brought boulders in from the area. So when you talk about stones, and being in the Waterstone community, you see at our entrance, we have boulders, we have that kind of cupola look, we have a little more historical look. We've worked with Meyer, and Meyer has a wonderful facade, you know, and that was part of working, you know, together to determine the facade of that particular structure. So I think, you know, it could be a win for, you know, Oxford Township, for residents, and for Beaumont if we work on design together to help make this particular structure not so, you know, a huge eyesore within the community, but complement the community with the design standards. because Mr. Wickersham mentioned about that green space area and looking out from your backyard view, and that's exactly where I fall in with that green space and looking at it from that view. Third issue is, and we discussed this, the signage, but one thing that wasn't mentioned is the signage. I understand the wayfinding, and I don't have a problem with that, or the monument, but I'm looking at the banner or the branding signage, and we didn't mention about the illumination of it, and that's a concern for those residents of us in the evening. You know, Beaumont's blue, is that going to be illuminated high up on what story of the structure? So how much of the signage is going to be illuminated, and what are we going to look at in the evening hours, as well as what we're going to see in the daylight time frames? So I wanted to mention about the illumination perspective of signage as well that concerns us. The fourth one wasn't mentioned this evening, and I term it noise pollution. Just the siren policy. We're going to have ambulances coming to this ambulatory facility day and night. Already residents in Waterstone, we have quite a few sirens that come through going in, unfortunately, to Independence Village to assist residents there during the day and in the evening hours. And so I just wonder what the policy will be about siren usage to the hospital and to the ambulatory facility, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. And that's something just to, keep note of at this time. And then the fifth one relates a little bit to us, and it wasn't mentioned this evening either, is the water line. Last time we heard that the water line linkage was going to be to us in the Waterstone area to the west. And that's a little concern as to how that will impact our water pressure in the Waterstone community if that take place. And do we have the infrastructure already in place to handle that? So that is something I wanted to bring up at this time since we were talking about infrastructure. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak? Is your name and your address?
Good evening. My name is Chris Peace. I don't want to give my address, but it's probably already been FOIA'd by now. So 1390 Foreland, I live in the Township. Been there for 5 years and have lived in the village for 5 before that. First, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to speak on this matter. Some people know me, some people don't. I've usually got a pretty good sense of humor about things, but this is something that I take pretty seriously, and that's regarding health and the safety of our community. I have a little bit more of a vested interest in this because I have a son with a very rare congenital heart defect, okay? Some of you guys know that he just recently had some tests. I thank my community for its prayers and so forth, and things are turning out pretty good there. But obviously, I'm going to support this hospital. And as I sit here and I listen, I hear a lot of very trivial, bureaucratic things that really don't make much of a difference to someone like me who in the middle of the night needs to rush to an emergency room. A lot of you guys maybe have never experienced, and I hope to God you never experience, having to rush your 4-year-old son with a heart condition to the hospital. I hope none of you ever have to know what it's like to have to drive behind the ambulance on its way to Royal Oak Beaumont or Crittenton Hospital and have the lights go on the ambulance when they're trying to take your kid there, okay? This is a matter of life and death for a lot of people. And with my son's recent stay in the hospital, I found a lot of people in our community dealing with heart conditions as well. It's kind of weird. It's a small community, but it's pretty close-knit. And so I know a lot of people know what that feels like, and they would never want to have that happen. So what it would mean to us is having somewhere close that we could go. Again, Royal Oak Beaumont and Crittenton Hospital are way too far. We take our son to Mott Children's Hospital, and we've had to take helicopters out of Royal Oak Beaumont after he's been stabilized to get him there. So all of these things, the signs and the how it's going to look and how the lights are going to be and things like that. These things are all well and good, but they mean absolutely nothing to you when you need to get to somewhere quickly. Nothing. And I would suggest that everybody kind of take a step back and realize what this is for. Do I want this place to look good? Yeah, but at the end of the day, I really don't care. As long as the people in there are going to do a good job and take care of my family, that's all that matters to me. And to the people at Beaumont here, I would hope you guys would sharpen your pencils a little bit more. If I'm seeing the ordinance is 100 and you were able to get it down to, was it 500 when you asked for 3,000? Sharpen your pencils a little bit more. Look at the ordinances and see what they are and work within those parameters, and don't ask for exorbitant deviations from those ordinances, because all it does is stand to hold this process up, and people in our community who really need it could just really use everyone to move a little bit faster. Property values, things like that, I don't care. Put the helipad on top of my roof. Put it in my backyard, I don't care. I'll come and I'll help lay the bricks. I don't care what happens. I just really hope you guys take some time to step back, realize what is at stake here, and get it done. It's something I support, and I know that this board is capable of doing that, and I would really appreciate your consideration in that matter. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, let's take some, I'm sorry, did I miss somebody, or you're just ready to go?
I got a list.
All right, yeah, we're going to move on to commission member discussion. So, Mr. Curtis.
Okay, first off, this public hearing was held on December 12th, and of all the comments that came in, there were 19 people that spoke, 15 were positive, I believe it was. And those 15 that were positive were the administrators of our school system, the fire chiefs from 3 different municipalities, the lieutenant and the sergeant from our Oakland County sheriffs that support this. All those comments are not being heard tonight for the need for this hospital and for the need for some of these deviations in our ordinance. The first critical thing is we are putting the sewer line in on M24 in 2020. When that sewer line ends at the Beaumont property, if and when this is approved, I want reassurance that we are going to continue that water and sewer line up the front of the property. I mean, that's critical, and it's got to be done. Number 2, to address the traffic. You can't get to a hospital right now in 25 minutes. There's so much traffic. So we are addressing the traffic situation because there's currently a study, and one of the developers is in the room working with Beaumont Hospital to ingress and egress from their property. So MDOT is working with traffic studies from Beaumont. We have developers working with developers to increase the safety and the movement of traffic in that area. So I think that's going to be addressed for us. Third, this property's been vacant for more than 10 years. It's been sitting there. No one's been cutting the grass. They've been dumping junk there. Citizens that live alongside of it have encroached on it to the point that there's fire pits, boats, campers, all kinds of stuff just scattered about on the property. I have no fear that this lasts 10 years for this PUD, because this property has been left in dire straits for more than 10 years since it was vacated by a gravel company right on M24. My first question to the applicant, Commissioner, is if this certificate of need was approved, would the timeline on the PUD be adjusted? Would it be driven down? Would it be shrunk up? We're not waiting till 2027. If we get the CON, if Beaumont gets the CON approved in 2023-24, would construction or engineering start at that time on phase 2? That's my first one.
You want to answer directly?
Sure, let's do that.
Let's just do that so we can get things kind of
If
sorted
the
out.
con is approved, would the timeline be adjusted?
I don't know how that would work from a legal perspective, but our intention is to move, to once we get the necessary approvals to act on them.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't know how that would work out. I would leave that to the attorneys to determine how to word that, but we want to move.
This is not, we're not playing here. This is going to come if they get the CON. That's my concern.
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Representing the township board. They're going to want to see something collective from our commission stating, yeah, we're approving this, given this time frame. And I imagine we're attaching
We are recommending
years, yeah?
reaffirmation in this PUD that the planning commission agrees that since this CON is in debate right now, phase 2 is not going to happen until that's qualified at the state. But the ambulatory care is going to start sooner.
Correct.
So the township board sent it back here just so that we understood that this needs to be spoke about and recommended in our PUD recommendation to the township board.
If I may add on
Go
to
ahead.
the original question that I asked, this is why we bring our lawyer friends with us, but Jack, we actually have a 24-month requirement to begin construction after receiving CON approval.
Yeah, if we don't do it within the 24 months, we lose the certificate of need. So once we get it issued, and we have an appeal right now, and we're fighting that quite vigorously, we're not going to let it slip. And so the CON standards itself has, you have to construct it by 2 years. I think there's an extension period which you could go for, but it's already addressed in the certificate of need standards.
Okay, that makes it easier for me to tell the township board that Don Workman's concern is going to be addressed based on their certificate of need. So I'm all good with that.
All right, since we're on that particular point, mind if I interject one question?
Sure, go ahead. I only have two more.
Let's assume the CON does not come through. What, I mean, now you've got a lot of property sitting there. Is there any sort of plan by Beaumont?
Not at this time. It's the primary reason why we're asking for the medical and hospital use in addition to C2, as opposed to replacing C2, so that if we don't get approval for the hospital, we're not land developers or property developers. Frankly, we would want to dispose of what we aren't using, and hospital and medical use would not be valuable to anybody else besides us.
And if I may interject, Brian and I get along well, so he's used to me doing this. I also want to help give context. Providence Park, you recall that it's a hospital now. It took 12 years in court to get that built. So that just gives you a context as to the 10 years. It took the state, fighting with the state, Ascension Healthcare System, 12 years to get the hospital built. So when you see the 10 years, you may react, but when you look at the other precedent that we have in the state, we're actually hoping we do a little better than 12 years. And I also understand we are both in the unfortunate situation of the state issued saying there's a need out here, and we applied for it, and then they recant it. And so and this is a matter of public record, so I can say this, we not only have one appeal, we have 2 appeals pending. And in fact, one is at the Michigan Court of Appeals right now. And the other one, we're on the certificate of need application itself that was denied. So we're going to continue to fight that as well, but we're using a lot of different legal strategies on it. But just so you're aware, we do have one already at the Michigan Court of Appeals on this matter. So I hope that helps to answer
Thank
the
you. That
question and give a context.
Answers those questions. The other one, we failed to mention one point. I did some, since I'm part of the Economic Development Subcommittee, I did some examination of our 20,000 village and township people. You have about 200 employees that work for Beaumont that live here in Oxford. That was kind of like 1%. It's still a lot of people.
Yes.
The signs. I know that we're not just going to build a 7-story building that's going to look like a box, a refrigerator box, sitting in the middle of the field. If you've gone around to Providence, Ascension, that's the one in Novi, even the old ones up in Lapeer, and even at Ascension and Crittenden, even Beaumont hospitals that have added on, it's just not a big box. Taking in Don's consideration, as outlined in his letter, the deviations of splitting it, raising different levels, moving it side. It's in all the buildings, and I'm hoping that it's going to come into this building. Is that a fact?
Well, to maybe just react to some of Mr. Wortman's comments, if you don't mind, related to that. One thing that I just don't think we'll be able to commit to is getting what I think everybody would wish they could have, which is that full building elevation or rendering. There's just too much work that goes into that when we're looking at fully designing the space. We'd have to go away and come back, 8 months from now to just get that amount of work done to put something in front of you that is realistic. What I think we can do is what he was suggesting in terms of committing to some of the design principles. We plan setbacks and canopies and projections and all those things in just about every building that we do. So if some level of commitment required to some of the architectural concepts, is satisfactory. I think that that's something that Beaumont and the township will be able to see eye to eye on. But I just want to be very straightforward. We're going to really struggle to actually put together a full rendering and elevation at this preliminary level.
Okay, you know, this is our first building of this size that we have in Oxford.
Yeah.
I mean, this town's been around for a long time. Due to the basis of the LAA and the selection of this piece of property, which is about the only one you could build this on, or in the township, on M24, our wall signage and freestand signs are, they're based, if I used it as a percent of the building, we have a 2-story building, 10,000 square foot building. You put a 200 square foot sign on it, it looks humongous. Now you take a 300,000 square foot building and you put a 1,200 foot sign on it. I don't know as if it's going to be that intrusive. Personal opinion, listening to the other people at the public hearing on December 12th, it didn't come off as that egregious, is the word I want to use, because the previous request was 5,000 square foot of signage.
And I think just to comment on that, if you don't mind if I interject, Jack, we did do some homework on this to really try to understand, what does this look like? And I would tend to agree with you, and I'm going to flip forward to just one of our appendix slides to give you a visual here. But we did some looks around local area signs to try to put it in perspective, because I would agree with you that your ordinance isn't necessarily designed for a building of this size. And we looked at some of the properties kitty corner to us there, the Chase Bank, McDonald's, and Pet Value, and looked at it from a building elevation area and what the coverage on that elevation would be, which is what we're used to in some of the other townships that we have developments in. And you look at Chase and McDonald's at 7% of their elevation. You look at Pet Value at 10%. And then you look at what we're proposing for the size of building on those particular elevations, and it's 1% on that west-facing elevation and 5% on that north elevation approximations. So I tend to agree with you that, perhaps the ordinance isn't necessarily meant for a building of this size. The other piece that I would want to mention is, related to the branding and monument and the height being 14 feet that we're requesting. I know this is the village of Oxford and not in your township, but when you look at a couple of the businesses just a few miles down the street, the Ace Hardware and the Oxford Marketplace, both of those venues have signs that are 16.7 and 17.9 feet high. So I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with those, just to drive by them to get a feel for what we're talking about here. And while we call them branding signs, the ones off the road are incredibly important as well. Why 14 feet is just not a number, it's really intentional. It's because the print on that sign won't actually start until you get above vehicle level. So when you're behind a car trying to determine which entrance you're going into, you can see the words above that car line ahead of you. So it is a extremely meaningful number for us. It is not, well thought out and really provided to us in terms of how fast is somebody going to be driving down M24, at what inch number do those letterings need to be, and then how high up do they need to be for somebody traveling at that speed to be able to see them. There's real math that goes behind this. It's not an arbitrary number. So I thought you might find a little bit of our research helpful when we were looking at how we were approaching this.
That's the same research I did, but I don't have it on a chart.
Good.
For example, the hospital down by Novi, the suburban center, what is that, Ascension Providence?
Correct.
Does anybody know what the size of that sign is? I mean, it's up on the 7th floor, and this thing's got to be 3,000 square foot. It's got to be. It's monstrous. And I looked at it and I went, well, in comparison, and that's where I started coming up with these figures.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be intrusive? Any sign is intrusive. My neighbor put a one light bulb in a lamp in the middle of his yard. I find it intrusive. I mean, I live in the dark, but this is what we need. This is what the professionals say we need. This is what the state said we need. I'm really in favor of this. That's the end.
One more, just to build on the previous comments that Joanna reminded me we had in our appendix. You recall the visibility slides that I showed that kind of had a mock-up of just a building sitting there. This isn't our actual building, but when we gave it to our consultant and they said, well, can you provide us a building mass so we can plot it on the land so we can really see what the people are looking like? This is the image that was in that, kind of blown up. So you can see that there is some of the architectural qualities that Mr. Wortman was asking us to consider. This isn't something, Joanna, I don't know how long it took you to mark this up, but probably over a lunch break. So it doesn't have, a tremendous amount of thought. It's just kind of what naturally comes to us when we think, what do these buildings look like, or what could they look like? And you see the various setbacks and projections, angling, the shadow lines that were being mentioned. So this isn't, again, not what we're doing, but this is kind of when somebody says, provide me a mass, what we naturally would draw up, not a big box. So something I think might also just help from a visual perspective.
Can I ask, these are new tonight, correct? These drawings, this drawing and the signage? That wasn't submitted in the packet.
It was not. This was just meant, this is our own little appendix that we were using just to be prepared. We'll be happy to send them out to have, I guess, a closer look at them.
I would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So the signage absolutely was our studies. We were trying to prepare for the conversation today, anticipate some of the questions once we received your comments. This particular rendering was already in the packet, just in our visibility study, so it was kind of small and blurry, probably easy to overlook. But that's pretty much what the massing would look like. That corresponds to that floor plan on the site that we were studying as our go-to site plan, preliminary site plan. Again, preliminary massing to the preliminary site plan. This is pretty much how far we can take this at this point without, as Brian mentioned, deploying a extensive amount of resources that we don't feel we can at this time.
Okay,
This is
John?
that's the little mass we were talking about. We essentially, from this angle, just clipped it and blew it up for you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, go ahead,
Mr. Chair, I don't want to be redundant, and Jack hit on some really good points. Thank you, Jack. I looked at all the documents in close detail, and I guess, I like to hear comments from the public too, so thanks, Chris. That was important to hear. And for me too. But I don't want to back up and start all over, but I looked at your PUD duration deviation chart. Of course, it was a little overwhelming at first because I thought, wow, 2032. I said, I'd like it sooner than that myself because I'm going to be way in my 80s, and I'm thinking I might need the place. No, I'm not joking.
Yeah.
I used to have to deal with my father and haul him all the way down to Royal Oak, Beaumont. From where I lived in Lake Orion at the time. So I can see the need. Obviously, I get all that. Signage deviation. There's a lot of things about signage in the past that we haven't really looked into our sign ordinance with. And I've talked to Mr. Wortman about this before. And speeds are also something in regards to signage that we don't have in place in Oxford. And when you get on 24 and people are starting to zoom out of town, and they're going 55 miles an hour, by the time they hit some of those lights up at Ray Road, I'm going, they're not fooling around, And when they're coming southbound, they're on your butt going 55 miles an hour before they even start slowing down. Those are all important things to see signage at speed levels too. So that's something I didn't think about until tonight again, and we didn't talk about it. But I have my own ideas on signage. The branding is one thing versus wayfinding. I spent almost 2 hours down at Royal Oak, Beaumont, going around, and man, you need that wayfinding, because to know where the emergency entrance was, to know where the hospital entrance was, and to know where you could park in a parking garage and take that tunnel bridge over to the eye center and all that stuff. I drove around back where the ambulances actually go and drop people quickly and all that stuff. I kind of got caught back there almost, but so I wouldn't be in someone's way. there's a lot to wayfinding. I don't really have much problem with the wayfinding stuff you guys are proposing. And then I got thinking about it, because it was kind of hit me, and I had to ask Don, because I didn't even know myself. A billboard sign is 672 square feet on average. So I thought, well, that's a pretty big sign. You know, when I'm driving down the road and I see a billboard sign, I'm thinking, it's pretty big. So then I started thinking, well, how big is big, you know? Then I just sat here tonight and looked across this room, and I looked at these 2-foot squares in the ceiling tile, and they're about 48 feet from wall to wall. So I'm a dumb math guy. I do little math things all day long because of what I do with my job and stuff. And so I looked at 600 square feet, and I said, well, what's that divide out to? Like, how high would it be, and how long would it be, and stuff like that. And then I looked at the perspective of the size of the building, and I thought, you know, if we had something that was a little bit less, but you still had a 60-foot long sign, it's bigger than this whole room. It's bigger. It's way bigger, and it was so many feet high, close to 6, 7, 8 feet high. I mean, you could be less than 600 square feet, so maybe I'm off on the 600 feet. I was thinking, you know, if we reduced it down slightly, we could still have 720 square feet or something, a little bit less than 1,200, and be a reduction in what we're asking for. Because once we approve it, I think we're saying we've given and granted the variance on the PUD for signage. I mean, basically, we're the group that does that once we establish a PUD agreement. So I'm not sure on that whole 600, 1,200 thing on that part with branding, but I get size of building and I get size of signs. You know that building that's on the Beaumont, that sign that's on the Beaumont building down there?
Mm-hmm.
You know how big it is? I know it's an awkward question.
I'm gonna have to go through my memory. I don't exactly remember, but I believe it's a different type of sign because it's a illuminated.
It's rectangular with lit. It's lit.
Illuminated black background
Mhm.
sign. Illuminated blue background sign. I think it's at least 8 feet tall, and with the proportion of our sign, it has to be at least 50 feet long because of proportions of the sign.
So 8 times 50 would be what?
400.
Man, I was going like,
I'm just
okay,
gonna comment to that.
take a
that's-
percentage off of 600.
Have you had a feeling of, have you had a feeling of a proportions of that sign? Because I personally, when I look at that sign, it looks pretty kind of puny in
It's
comparison.
very
to-
tiny compared to the building.
That's right.
That's why I was trying to ask you, because I couldn't tell what size it was, literally.
It's approximately
I didn't have a
400
device
square
that would do
feet.
that.
It looks
I
very
know there's
small.
one on my phone, I can do that and hold it up to stuff and get sizes. And I didn't take time to do it, but then I have a picture of it in my phone, and I also looked at it again on my iPad this morning, because I said, well, what does that really look like? So I
This,
showed it to my wife, and I said, what does that look like to you? She goes, well, that's really tiny. And I said, okay, because it says William Beaumont on the ground in those gold letters down there, right on 13 Mile. That's what it says. I mean, you can see all that when you're driving by. I
Yes.
mean, that stands out. So, okay, branding is something to maybe think a little bit about. I mean, it doesn't have to look huge, but it doesn't have to look too small either. And I'm thinking, you know, you might be able to come down a little bit based on the size of the building, maybe. On your frontage, because it's all about frontage. I mean, the building gets big because it goes out and around and stands up taller and all that. So that's something I'm still not totally locked into yet with the 1,200 square feet, but that's just me, that's just my opinion.
may I
Now, in your
comment?
traffic pattern comments, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So Royal Oak has a specific speeds on 13 Mile. The limit is 35 miles an hour, and then on Woodward.
Yeah, it's a lot slower.
It's much slower.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have more time to actually see the signs properly.
Yeah, I admit that, and that's one of the things that we have talked about, maybe looking into our own sign ordinances, create something along major thoroughfares where speed is relevant to size of signage also. We just don't have it in place in Oxford right now. So we're kind of stepping on the stones of what we have in place, and maybe we're a little
Absolutely.
historic with some of it compared to what could be out there and done for signage for people. But I can't talk about that this evening, because that's going to drag this meeting out too long.
Absolutely. So examples of signs that we're installing that we're asking for today
Yeah.
is we have one sign installed in our property in Northwestern Highway, our corporate building. And also, these are the signs of the that we are going to be installing in Lenox, our upcoming ambulatory center prototype in Lenox Township.
But in my opinion, to be honest with you, that sign that's the monument sign, that's what I'm looking at all the time when I'm driving. I could see a sign on a building, certainly, but when I'm going down the road and I got traffic in front of me and all the other stuff, it's usually those monument signs that help me the best when I'm trying to figure out where do I turn into this place. I mean, I've driven by places before I had to turn around and come back. So I think the monument stuff is something we need to talk about too. And I'm not real opposed on all of the height, based on when I just looked across the street at some existing non-conforming height on some signs there, but I didn't want to bring that up in total regard. I got confused on something when I read in your traffic pattern study. It talked about improvements along the Lapeer Road, M24 corridor and right-of-way in that. Well, obviously, these haven't been accepted by MDOT yet, but, something would have to be worked out with MDOT to make it all work. But it also said in the report that the additional site traffic would be mitigated, but traffic along Lapeer Road would also improve. I didn't get what that meant. Could you elaborate on that? I didn't understand that comment in that letter when I got all your documents here, but you know what I'm talking about in regards to that for traffic?
Well, first of all, the medians are going to be reconstructed because right now you have two-way medians going on between northbound and southbound of Lapeer Road.
Yeah, one comes right to a point when you're leaving, going
That's
north
correct.
to south.
That's pretty dangerous intersection point to be approaching and using as a turn, with especially with those speeds and your current traffic volumes that you're experiencing. Therefore, rebuilding the entire median will help mitigate those prone to accidents intersections.
Are you stating that you'll be rebuilding that median?
We are working with MDOT on the M24 project. Is not decided yet who's rebuilding it exactly, but we have a common plan of how to rebuild it in such a way that you will be able to do the U-turn in front of our property or turn straight in a signalized fashion to the Beaumont property going southbound.
Because those are the first comments I've heard this evening in regards to that. Maybe Mr. Sharp knows more than I do, or maybe Jack does. Yes, Jack?
Yeah, Tom, behind the Beaumont people is Andrew from Culver's. And what's happening right now is Beaumont had to resubmit their traffic study. Andrew from Culver's is working with Beaumont because he's impacted at his, because he has right in, right out only.
Yeah, I got it.
So what they're trying to do is work together, MDOT, Beaumont, Culver's, to come up with a solution for right and left turn, Michigan left turn, and eliminating right in, right out, because it really affects Andrew's business.
Okay.
Also in that area.
Well, you elaborated on it.
There's also more. It's unapproved, but there is, MDOT is proposing, looking at, and studying what they're gonna do north of Golden Gate, or, I'm sorry, north of Harriet,
Yeah.
after the big project's done. So
Okay.
there's a lot of motion going on right now.
Well, that's given me some better input. I mean, because I said, how does it actually improve? Well, you just explained part of it. And I know there's an extension of the 18-inch water main, sewer and all that stuff. And Jack already made his comments. I'm not gonna go back into that.
Did we get an answer to that though, Jay?
Well, we don't have an answer yet, but we want answers.
Beaumont will have to run that 18-inch sewer to the northern end of their property, because once they start the ambulatory care unit, they'll have to, they have to get it to the sewer, that sewer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right,
Jim?
Haven't seen the plans, but that's what I'm assuming.
That is the plan?
Gotta get the sewage
That's
out
correct.
somewhere.
That's correct.
Well, we don't know that yet, but those would be things
These are
that
the
you would be
assumptions we're
answering.
working with.
Those would be things that you'll be answering. You also stated, when the construction plans are prepared for the township engineers, you would incorporate green technologies such as rain gardens and the stormwater management part of the plan. I see that as a benefit to the community. So is that still part of your plan? That would be part of your activities? That's what it states in your documents that you submitted.
Yes, we are planning to incorporate various landscaping features to prevent, we heard your comments really loud and clear, that your concerns about our stormwater basins not to be catching debris. We will be working with our landscape architects to design it in such a way that it's actually pleasing to the eye. I'll show you an example that we were thinking of that maybe using these type of strategies. I'll show you.
Well, those are things that you will be answering.
For example, when we speak about rain garden, the picture in the left corner and the bottom, it's basically landscaped detention pond that we would be, that type of landscaping will be incorporating on that site.
Okay. And I think that's a benefit to our community. I feel good about that. And I'm not real good in landscape design. I'm not an expert in that field, so I kind of back out from there on what your comments would be on all of. But Don, they just have to meet all the requirements for landscape.
Yeah,
And based in what zoning district? I mean,
right
that's,
now it'd be the C2.
is that our best?
Remember, the PUD can go beyond.
We can require
Yeah,
more.
you can request more. And
Okay.
there's another new slide, is that correct?
Well, this is a slide they just took a picture of from a previous, from another place and said that it's something they could implement as part of some
Yeah,
greenscape.
But this wasn't in the original.
Yes,
it's
this is, we
That's
read
not in
your
our doc.
comments, we prepared for this conversation to have a little bit of more props to illustrate our answers.
Okay, good.
I mean, currently, on the monument sign part of it, we're still talking, now I'm back in the signage, because I'm looking at my notes on how I took them when I was going through the document. Honestly, for myself, I like signs to get up off the ground a little bit anyway, because in the wintertime here in Michigan, you never know what you're gonna have. I mean, they need to be up a little bit, and so then you take that, and then you put the size of the sign on top. I had some reservations about the total height of it, but I'm starting to understand when I'm following another vehicle too, what I can see and not see. I mean, maybe you could get away with 12 feet. Maybe you don't need 14. Maybe you can shave something to help us out and make things work in your direction that work for us too, or, because you need to get good visibility on your signage, especially coming off the highway. People are coming 30 miles an hour, going to 45, and then up to whatever they accelerate to, and there's a lot of speeders.
If I may comment to that one, I'm just going to speak about concessions. Our standard Beaumont monument sign, the pylon sign, our branding standard throughout our organization is actually 16.9.
Oh,
16
throughout?
feet 9 throughout. That's where we're
Is it
installing
that height
everywhere else.
in the other locations out there?
Yes, this is, we are downgrading this sign for the campus based on your particular requirements. As we mentioned, we sharpened our pencils, looked at what we think that we really need to make this work, and we think 14 feet, this is where we really need to be.
Okay. I don't think I have too many more comments at this time. I mean, I have some, but they're minor in nature.
Okay, Meg, or,
I have one concern. If the certificate of need doesn't move forward, you did mention that, that the property, because it would still be C2, you would have your ambulatory. I got the sense that maybe what's remaining would be sold. What would happen with the rest of the property if you don't get your certificate of need?
It's kind of hard to imagine what's going to happen in 10 years with
No,
our,
I
with
understand.
the business.
But my concern is there enough footage left on that property to do anything with it based on where they're placing the ambulatory center?
Absolutely. If I might illustrate,
Sure.
maybe for some context, I'm going to use this sign. We intentionally try to position this property in such a way that when you have a main boulevard with access to that site, it's kind of in the middle of the property. It will give you about, when we develop ambulatory, we'll have a appropriate amount of parking to provide sufficient self-park for ambulatory building alone, and we could subdivide the remainder of the lot. It's approximately 50% of the 26 acres that is sufficient to develop a lot of things within C2 zoning.
Okay, I just know that some of the topography of that lot is not fantastic. So is there going to be something buildable left? I want your
Absolutely.
certificate of need to go through, I really do.
So-
But I also don't want
Sure.
half of that property to sit vacant and be the eyesore that it
So
it
to that
is.
point,
It
it's
doesn't move
approximately
forward.
5 acres that is difficult to build on in the back due to the size and the topography, that little, I call it the bird tail at the end. The remainder of that property, up to subdividing it, it will be approximately 8 acres left.
If I may add to, once we do move forward with phase one, and I know we have another developer in the room that would probably concur with this, but it's going to become a much more attractive place for development. I would not imagine us having a challenging time trying to dispose of the other half if we weren't able to move forward. So to your concern of it sitting empty, I don't believe that will be the case. I think this is a net gain from a development perspective either way.
And we're happy with the fact that the rest of that piece can be used for something else.
Myself?
And
Oh,
anybody.
yes.
Okay.
I think that if you had the other half of that property with an 18-inch sewer line in front of it, it would definitely go.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Back to when Mary Ann got up and spoke, and she was regarding illumination and what Jack said about the light bulb in the yard and all that stuff. Don, wouldn't they have to comply to all the photometrics and requirements?
Yes.
And-
Yeah,
and
we're
by
not,
foot candles on property?
yeah, all the other ordinance,
So light intrusion into adjacent parcels and everything would all be met by standards of what we already have in place, right?
correct.
So, okay, I just want to make
Just
sure for
because
the
it's a
cit-
PUD does not make them exempt from other sections of the ordinance.
Right, so I just want to make sure that illumination is not going to be something for an adjacent property owner to have to be concerned about, because we have to make them meet those requirements. And traffic was discussed, M24, height's been discussed, and signage illumination, okay. Just
wanna
trying to
make
get,
sure
just
that-
trying to get to my answers, make sure I can put myself on track where I want to be.
Yeah, Mary Ann doesn't want to look at disco lights or anything like that, right?
No, I don't want to comment.
All right, Mr. Knoll?
I'll be very, very short. I appreciate all the behind-the-scenes work that the commission has done, as well as Beaumont and the general public. A lot of questions have been answered that I don't need to go through. One thing I do have, you did talk about traffic improvements, and you talked about traffic improvements of changing things in the medians for Phase 2. Is the work that you're currently doing today going to complement Phase 2, so we don't have to tear 24 up?
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you put the Phase 1 in,
That would be good.
the pavement will be laid and not disturbed, the best of your knowledge?
Yeah, to the
Okay.
best of our knowledge, MDOT, and they're going to want to work for the future. They, as much as I think everybody that you would ever find, don't want to have to revisit that.
So, the paperwork is not current to what's happening today, and I appreciate both sides of it, but that would be my major concern.
Absolutely.
But you've done a great job, thank you. Thank you for the board for all their work.
Jack?
I did have one more comment. While we are working on M24, the other developers in the room, I just want you guys to understand that we are looking out for everybody. Is Andrew comfortable with the relationship he's built with Beaumont and with MDOT? I know MDOT is very hard to work with.
Yeah, I'll let Andrew answer that.
Yeah, my main concern is just, having a loop around to head south out of my right in, right out parking lot. And then also for the northbound traffic, or the traffic heading north to loop just south of Market Street, back southbound again. So that's my biggest concern is that. So we'll see what MDOT's got to say and then hopefully make them understand what's
Thank
needed.
you.
Yep.
Okay, so Township Board wanted us to look at these 4 points. I think, from what I've heard in the room and amongst this commission, reaffirming the use is okay. The timing, I haven't heard anybody ask for any other different timing on this commission. The height, just Commissioner Berger requested it be a bit smaller, but I didn't hear anything else from anyone else. And those are really the 4 points. So it sounds as if we're gonna redo what we've already done without any changes,
Can I help you?
unless I hear anything different.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the Township Board reaffirmed approval of the preliminary PUD plan for Beaumont Medical Campus, parcel 04-22-200-004, located on Lapeer Road, currently zoned C2, applicant William Beaumont Hospital. This recommendation of reaffirmed approval is based upon the finding that the proposed PUD meets the eligibility requirements of Section 14.2. Further, this recommendation of reaffirmed approval includes the following. Number one, the Planning Commission affirms its prior recommendation following the December 12, 2019 public meeting to approve the use of subject property for hospital and ambulatory uses in addition to the C2 use. Number two, the Planning Commission recommends to the Board Beaumont's request to waive the zoning ordinance requirement that a final PUD be submitted within 12 months within 12 months following board approval of preliminary PUD and substitute said requirement for a time period of 10 years. Number three, the Planning Commission recommend Beaumont's request to increase the overall building height to 110 feet. Number four, the Planning Commission recommends approval of Beaumont's request to increase signage allowances. Number five, any unresolved conditions called out in the engineer's letter dated February 15th, 2020, and the Carlisle Wortman letter dated 2/14/2020. End of motion.
I'll second.
It's been moved and supported. Is there any discussion on the motion?
No, maybe other than the fact, I still want to have Mr. Schultz concerns, no, even though he didn't have any changes from his previous December 12th letter, just noted that we want his concerns considered too.
Can you hear that?
Sorry.
And Chief Schultz.
The fire chief's comment.
I'll amend my motion to include the fire chief's letter dated,
Well, it's technically February 19th, but from the previous letter of December 12th.
That's from the letter.
Yeah, it's on the letter.
I'll amend my motion.
Okay.
I'll
I have a-
second the amended motion.
Okay. It's been moved and re-supported. I have a comment to make on it as well.
I have a point of order. If,
Go ahead.
just make sure when you vote, you have to vote on that amendment first, and then you vote on the original motion.
Thank you.
All right, let me ask you a question then about changing it.
This is discussion,
Yeah, on your motion.
okay?
You noted the 110 feet. Do you have a language that might include that says that is for phase two only, the 110 feet?
Do I have,
The phase two, we're allowing to be 110.
oh,
How is that?
it's laid out there.
Hold on for just a minute. We're
It-
in discussion.
Phase two is laid out to be the 110 feet. The ambulatory care is not.
Right, but is that what the motion says?
I can amend my motion. I can withdraw my motion and add that. What would you like to do? Call to order?
If you want to amend it again, you just have to vote on this
The
most
amendment.
recent amendment, then you have to vote on the first amendment, then you have to vote on the original motion.
The Planning Commission recommends Beaumont request to increase the overall building height to 110 feet. The ambulatory care, are you going to limit that, or are you proposing?
Yeah, what I was getting at is that, yeah,
We're on the same page.
yeah,
We're not going to tell them they can put an ambulatory care center in there that's 110 feet tall.
but I think that's, we
Phase one.
could. But we could. I mean, I think that's
If it
what it
was-
says.
Yes.
So now you have to change it so it doesn't say that. So it just restricts it to the phase two, the 110 feet.
Let the applicant help us with this for a minute, can we?
Am I correct in that? The ambulatory care is not gonna be 110 feet, correct?
You are correct that the ambulatory care is not going to be 110 feet, but it would likely go above the two-story current ordinance. The way that we had it laid out in that massing was that it's actually 3 stories high. So I don't know if we would necessarily want to get too specific around that request. I can tell you from a pure business perspective, there's not enough ambulatory services to build anything much taller than 3 stories. But that would be our comment, is we wouldn't necessarily want it limited to a particular phase, because even phase 1 goes above what the current ordinance is.
And also one comment, if I might add, we all want the hospital as fast as possible. So if we're going to use the language here, phase 2, phase 1, then if we receive a CON approval within the next 6 months, we would want to start with the hospital first. Therefore, using the language phase 1, phase 2 will be impeding our, will be challenging. So perhaps sticking to the verbiage building height will cover both of those phases.
Can you repeat the part about starting phase 2 before phase 1 so Jack can hear you?
Absolutely. So because, again, a CON process is an unknown process, we don't know when it's going to happen. It might happen that we will receive it within the next 6 months or so, or a year. We wouldn't be building ambulatory center first. We would go straight into building a hospital. Therefore, using a phase 1, phase 2 language in this resolution will be impeding us from building that as a step 1.
So the request to increase.
We're just trying to work the language out. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, if I add the word hospital after building, the planning commission recommends Beaumont's request to increase the overall hospital building height to 110 feet.
Yep, that works for me.
I don't know if I like that. Why do we have to even make an amendment to your motion?
Yeah.
Your motion says 110 feet. I'm good with 110 feet. We do phase 1, we do phase 2. The only thing I want the amendment for is to make sure we have Chief Schultz's letter recognized as part of the motion, and that's the First Amendment. And we vote on the First Amendment, and then we vote on the motion.
I call the roll.
Okay, does everybody understand what the amendment, we're just voting on the amendment right now? And we're just to add Chief Schultz's most current letter of February 19th.
2020.
We'll vote on the motion.
And then we'll vote on the motion that Jack made. So to vote on the first amendment to the motion to add Chief Key's letter, I think I'm going to do a roll call vote. Ms. Knopf?
Yes.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Berger, yes. Because Hunwick and Spiz are absent, Mr. Young?
Yes.
Okay, so the amendment to the motion was voted on and approved. Now we're going to vote on the motion that Jack made previously, and I'm going to do a roll call vote on that. Does everybody understand that motion currently?
Yes.
Okay, so that being said, Mr. Curtis,
Yes.
Mr. Knoll,
Yes.
Ms. Knopf,
Yes.
Mr. Berger, yes. Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion has been approved to make a recommendation to the Township Board.
Thank you. With those 4 conditions, yeah? Okay, good. You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, let's move to item 9, new business. There is none. Can I get communication and committee reports? 10A, Economic Subcommittee.
I lost something here somewhere, trying to find it. It's our draft ordinance of the,
Well, I'll get to you next.
oh, okay, you economic?
Yeah, economic development, I mean, we haven't really had to meet. We've got pretty much everything going on.
Correct, I agree. 10B, Ordinance Review Subcommittee.
Well, that's us. That's, Mr. Hunwig's not here tonight, but, Mr. Nold and I and Mr. Wortman have presented the draft for the, it should be, I hope everybody got it. I have it. I'm supposed to have it, and I don't even know what I just did with it. It's 3 pages long, and,
I'll put it up on the screen for you.
oh, okay, that would be, thank you.
Thank you.
I got a copy or somewhere. Do I have it buried?
There you go. Why
Okay.
isn't it up on the screen?
Weak or no signal? I don't know. Did everybody get a copy of what we drafted for the food truck regulations?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to read it?
No.
Yes.
You did not? It's very well written, by the way.
He does say so, so.
Is the lectern
Susan,
disabled?
do we have to change anything to
Yep,
put him
sorry.
back on board?
Thank you.
Thank you.
CJ distracted me.
Sorry.
It's okay. Do you have it on there? Oh, you do have it on.
I gave mine away, Jack, sorry.
Oh, the motion.
Oh, no, it's going on.
Right here.
What, you got it unplugged?
No, it's plugged in.
I just handed it to him. You had
He,
it before.
well, it shouldn't matter. I switched back over to podium, or I switched back over to board.
I don't know. Lost it.
I lost my document too, so I don't even know what I did.
We all
Give me
did.
papers.
You
But
got-
I have,
You got foam on it.
I got foam on it.
I guess if everybody had a chance to read it, I mean, we could kind of go through it, and we don't have to go through it in a lot of detail, but I think there were a couple of particular comments that people had concerns over in the beginning, and one of them was the concern of what, obviously, they have to go get and receive health department approval to make this thing happen. The one thing that we are trying to get this through in front of everybody and get it recognized, it's something that we want to make a recommendation to the township board, is summer's going to be on us soon, and we need to get first reading, second reading, and put something in place. So by definition, we think the definition fills all the needs of what we need for the township. The food truck regulations, obviously, they're compelled to meet certain requirements for fire safety. The chief had certain concerns. We met all of his concerns within this ordinance. The health division has things that they have to have approved for these facilities to be able to be mobile and on sites here and there if they fry foods and prepare and whatnot. And so we have that covered in the ordinance through the Oakland County Health Division. We tried to make sure that we were specific, so if someone pulled up and parked on a street side, that the side to sell the food items were away from the street side and on the opposite side, so don't set them up so they're not a hazard to the people that want to use these temporary food sales vehicles on the roadways and such. And then we were also trying to make sure that, like, if you have a shop in the area in an industrial district, and you have your typical food trucks that pull up during their breaks and whatnot, that they had so many minutes to then be within that one location, and so they're not really considered the same requirement. They have to have a permit to have a food truck within the community for an event. So we think we covered all the bases. We looked at neighboring communities, we looked at faraway communities, and we took examples from different places of different communities that already have these in place and how they're working, even out of state. And, places like New York, California, a lot of places that deal with food vending situations now currently. And we think we've covered it quite well for the township. So if anybody has any objections to anything pertinent to what we have presented to you, we'd like to know now. Or otherwise, I'd be looking for a recommendation to then move this forward to the township board in a motion format that we could then take in that direction.
Tom, wouldn't it be to set the public hearing?
Oh, I guess we have to set a
Yeah.
public hearing. I forgot all
Or
about
do
that.
you send it to the board first?
No.
No, we can't. No, we gotta have a public hearing.
I move that the planning commission schedule a public hearing to consider the proposed food truck text amendments as dated in the Carlisle Wortman and Associates Incorporated memorandum of February 6, 2020.
I'll second.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed? See, that
I wanna
motion
thank
passes.
Mr. Wortman for that. Thanks, Don, I forgot.
Just my comment on it, I think it looks great to me. Big thing I wanted to make sure that we did was that we had the Oakland County Health Division permit first
Oh, yeah.
before they came to us, that's all.
Yeah.
Go on record, I hate
Good job.
food trucks.
Okay, engineering
Oh,
and,
wait, we still,
oh.
can I just linger a little bit longer? I'm not trying to make the meeting go longer.
Sure.
We have been working diligently on the cafe patio outdoor situation, and Don just received information recently from our attorney in regards to concerns there. And Don, do you want to speak on behalf of that right now? Because you talked, I didn't, to the attorney.
There's another iteration coming, so I'm gonna be forwarding this to the ordinance review committee. Tentatively, we schedule it for March 12th, Tom,
Yep,
correct?
yep.
So, we'll have a report back to the planning commission the end of March.
Yeah, well, whatever meeting's in March that we
Yeah.
have, yeah. Next available meeting date. So I didn't want you to think we forgot. Well, there is one other thing that, we were trying to look at, off the priority list.
yeah,
So we're trying to kind of stick to it now, because we've been lacking, timetable-wise, we're a little behind on some issues. So we think we're gonna move in the right direction from what we have heard from the planning commission in the direction they want us to move in. How's that? Is that stated
okay,
properly?
yeah,
Okay, Mr. Young, you had certain concerns,
yeah, no.
so, okay, all right.
Okay, planner report?
Nothing to report other than let the minutes reflect that even the township engineer referred to the lonely planner as Mr. Work. Yeah.
Respect, sir, respect, that's what that's called. All utmost respect.
So I'm the only guy that gets to call you Don?
Yeah.
And you have any other comments, or you good for the name? All right. Mr. Sharp?
We finally, Tullamore, down on Drainer Road, finally received their sanitary sewer approval, so we had a pre-construction meeting this week. They're looking to start in the next week or two with that'll be a 49-unit residential development down Drainer Road. They anticipate it, mostly utilities, stuff like that will probably be a few months, by the time asphalt plants open and things. With regards to M24, somebody noted about our favorite state tree that's out there. Been a little bit of a lull. That's because of union things and so forth that Consumers Energy and those guys have, but beginning March 1st, there will be one lane of traffic shut down heading southbound and one lane of traffic shut down heading northbound during the daytime hours from Burdick Street north. Everything that happened before was south. This happens north. So it's going to become a real mess here again in, in about a week or so. And then lastly, the bids for M24 did come in. Came in on February 21st. They were higher than what the MDOT's budget was, their projected estimate. But I believe that everything is still going to be moving forward. They have to work through some details to justify that. The Dan's Excavating was the low bidder, and they have not awarded the project yet. So in terms of schedule as to when the actual work's going to start from them, we don't know that yet. I will keep you posted at the next meeting or maybe in a month or so. But it probably looks like latter part of March, early part of April, I would assume, when the real work starts.
Okay, good.
That's it.
With that, for me, I've got the 2019 Planning Commission Action Report here and available if you need it. And with that, I adjourn the meeting at 8:40 p.m.